Okay, we should be in business. Hello, everybody, again, and glad to see you on this Wednesday. Hopefully, it's a nice day in the Knoxville area.
It is sunny.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, I think this is a good time right now in terms. I mean, here in Charleston, it's pretty good as well. So, um, why don't we? So I know it's been a month since we had this, and thank you for accommodating that we're doing this at noon today. In general, we'll be going back to 11:30 to 12:30, but thanks for accommodating this today. Um, Let me get us on to Safaria so we can pick up hopefully where we left off. Um, let's see. We are, let me see what looks, yeah, I think we're close to this. We were talking about positioning, the position of our bodies, um, and of reducing distractions and things like that. So this one, so now we're going to talk about, you know, how we reduce distraction, which of course is a question that is very relevant, for any time. This is kind of a timeless question. How do we pray with how do we pray with a good head on our shoulders and with proper concentration? What do we need to do in order to avoid distraction? And by the way, obviously, this is, not only is this relevant in terms of prayer, but frankly, everything we do. I mean, we're always talking about the things that distract us. Obviously, I'm on one of those devices right now. I'm on an iPad. One of those things that certainly lead us to distraction in our everyday activities. Um, so how did our sages look at this hundreds of years ago? So, so this first part it says when one is praying, one should not hold in one's hand tefillin and not a book of holy writings. Let's stop there for a second. At least at this point. So when we're talking about tefillin, again, we're talking about the phylacteries, the black boxes and straps that hold the words of commandments in them that one is supposed to wear, an adult Jew is supposed to wear when praying on a weekday morning. So it says that you shouldn't even hold it in your hand, meaning, okay, you're supposed to put the tefillin on your hand before you start praying, but you shouldn't start praying while you still have the tefillin in your hand about to put it on or to take it off, right? In other words, putting on and taking off the tefillin needs to happen separately from the exercise of the regular prayer service. So even holding a holy object like that, or when we say a book of holy writings, I think we're talking about a Chumash or a Tanakh. A Chumash being a book that has the five books of the Torah written in it, or a Tanakh meaning the entire Hebrew Bible. In other words, the only book you should basically have in your hand is that of a Siddur, of a prayer book, right? That's a very specific instruction that even by holding a holy item of one sort or another shouldn't distract us from the holiness of the moment that we are supposed to be engaged in. So that's that's a very I would say strict and specific way of looking at it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just it's striking. As always, when and if you have questions, just interrupt me. My setup here is I can't see your faces as I share the screen, so please just jump in.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does that apply also to if the talit? If you don't have, you're upstanding and you haven't put it on yet, and if you hold in your hand,
That's an excellent question. I would think that the talit that is common to wear during services these days, the answer to that would be yes, it would also apply. Um,
Right.
the reason why they don't specify it here, I'm thinking, is because think of the audience that this book was originally geared toward. This book was initially geared toward an audience in which the assumption was that, first of all, that you were dealing with men. That was the assumption, and also that you were dealing with men who had the custom of not wearing a talit unless they were either leading the service or were married. Right? There are numerous observant Jews, certainly in the Orthodox movement, who do not wear a talit during during prayer if they are not married. However, the assumption is that, well, whereas they're not wearing a talit, they are, however, wearing what we often refer to as tzitzit. They're wearing they're wearing fringes on an undershirt that they're wearing over the course of the day. So that may be why a talit is not specified here. That's only a guess on my part, but I think I think there's some justification to it.
right, thank you.
Sure, sure. Okay, so those are a couple of things we're not supposed to hold. Now,
Robin,
yeah, please.
I'm not even gonna try to keep straight which one is which, but the boxes, I've been with men's club and I've been the cameraman and
Yeah.
I've never seen women. Do women use those too, or they're just men?
So, I would say the wearing of tefillin among women is, I would say percentage-wise, it's a fairly low number, but it is in the conservative movement something that we either strongly encourage, if not require. Um, Now, that has been a much more recent phenomenon, in which you have, uh, the idea of egalitarianism in Jewish practice in the conservative movement is still relatively recent. You're still talking about the last 50, 60 years or so, which, in the scope of Jewish history is a very short period of time. So I know that when I've, talked to, at least with some women about the idea of wearing tefillin during, on weekday mornings, the response I often get was either I didn't, I, I didn't grow up with this, or I didn't see this growing up. I'm sorry. Sorry, do you have a question? I sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, no worries. So no problem. So anyway, so that's a common factor, I think, in that where, um, eh, so percentage wise, not a lot of women do. However, I I am of the belief that uh, women and men should have, the same, sense of obligation. So so to my mind, it's something that I certainly encourage. But I would say I would imagine that if I were to say you absolutely, you can't come into a weekday morning service without tefillin. And if I were to say that to both men and women, it's going to be a very challenging thing to enforce. Um, I would say that especially about Heska Muna, in which over the last number of years there hasn't been a weekday morning minyan, weekday morning service at Heska Muna for a while. Um, for those who at least I know at least a couple of you have attended, did attend weekday morning minyan at Heska Muna, prior to the pandemic. Was that ever discussed in terms of women wearing tefillin?
Well, I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
When I came to Heska and Muna 33 years ago, I debated with myself whether I should finally wear tefillin regularly. I had worn tefillin, but like at conferences, or at meetings, or where other women also wore tefillin. And then I discussed it with some of the people there, and in the end, after a lot of back and forth, I decided I wasn't going to wear tefillin because none of the other women wore tefillin. So I don't know that it has ever been discussed, like in a meeting or anything. But I was the only person who was interested in wearing tefillin, and but there were no other takers. So none of the other women who already were there and who were regulars at the morning minyan, none of them wore tefillin. And we only, I think, maybe had once or twice a visitor who wore tefillin, a woman visitor who actually wore tefillin. But I don't think it's ever been discussed in a formal way. No, not like we do, when we talk about should a congregation become egalitarian.
Right.
That's something that, like, I know at Heska and Muna was debated back and forth for a long time before it actually happened. But I'm not aware that we ever discussed whether women should wear tefillin or could wear tefillin. I suppose we could, but if nobody else does, it's kind of intimidating.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I know that, look, there are a lot of dynamics that go into it. So for instance, in Charleston, where the conservative synagogue has a weekday morning minyan, um, it is I can really only think of one or two women who would wear tefillin. And I think it was something that when I was the rabbi of that synagogue, I didn't I didn't push it, certainly, because I was more occupied with just making sure we had 10 people for a minyan.
Right.
My feeling was like, just be in the room for crying out loud, like as best you can, right? That was more my focus. And I think it's easier to do once the in other words, like once you have like a pretty steady minyan, once you have you have like steady minyan attendance, then I think you can work on some of the other stuff. But that that first part was basically has always been a challenge.
If there's something else the women get to do, is some of these things I look at like women get to ride side saddle. Well, I've never ridden side saddle, but if you don't fall off, it seems like it'd be easy to do. It'd be more comfortable for a man or a woman either way. And I've always ridden the male type saddle when I've ridden a horse or something. But
Okay.
it seems like to me, it's just like that is not that one sex is better than the other, but there are different roles for the sexes. I mean, is there something equivalent that the women get to do that men don't normally do?
I hear what you're asking, and I think that I would say that, uh, listen, I mean, I think you're talking about a tradition that for so much of its history was patriarchal. The whole question of and the extent, so there were many, in many ways, Judaism conformed to the norms of society. And only in, like I said, as I mentioned, recent years, we've had more, or at least certainly within conservative synagogues, more of a reckoning with that idea. And I know there have been, um, when I was attending rabbinical school, like the majority of my class at rabbinical school was female. And I know that sometimes there would be discussions about the struggles that some of them had about wearing tefillin, because sometimes what they would say was to the effect of, um, you know, tefillin has for so many years sort of been a guy's thing, right? Whether it should have been or not, it was kind of a men, a male activity. And so, okay, we're, now we're doing and now we're embracing egalitarianism. Fantastic. But and I obviously don't want to misrepresent the point of view that they had, but I know that my understanding is that some of the women would have discussions about, is there a way for the tefillin to be different for women so that it could feel like a more feminine activity? Again, if I apologize if I'm misrepresenting this in any way. And I don't know whether those discussions have really gone anywhere other than theoretical. There are, Will, I mean, maybe a little more to your question, there are a couple of activities that have certainly in traditional Judaism for a long time been seen as women's rituals. The idea of lighting candles for Shabbat, that has, I would say, observant communities have, always seen that mainly as a female role. Now, in my egalitarian worldview, there is no reason why a man can't light Shabbat candles. But I would say even in a lot of egalitarian households, it's still pretty common for mostly women to be doing that. Again, no objection if a man wants to do it, but and I guess I push back at the idea that, all right, this is specifically a woman's role or specifically a man's role. I will tell you a story that so my three children all went to, for at least for elementary school, went to the local Jewish day school in Charleston. And when my oldest was in last year of preschool, I remember we were sitting at Shabbat the table, and I was married at the time. And we were setting up for Shabbat dinner, and my oldest child said, "Oh, well, girls light candles and the boys say the Kiddush. The boys say the prayer over the wine or the grape juice." And I looked at my kid and I said, "And who told you that?" And now they didn't want to say, and they were also, to be fair, 4 years old. So I wasn't going to try to, they weren't in trouble or anything like that. But I know that at this particular day school, in which the Judaic teachers are almost all Orthodox, that was what they were, I'm 99% sure of who was the one who actually told them this. And, and I tried to redirect my kid and said, look, in many households, yes, that's the case, and that's fine. But that's not necessarily the case in our household. And so here's what we're going to do. Today, dad is going to light the candles and mom is going to say the Kiddush, right, mom? And the mother looked at me and said, "Yep, that's right." So, um, you know, it's like we are still in the midst right now of sort of this reckoning within Judaism about how to understand gender roles and whether they are absolute, whether they are flexible and fluid. Um, so yeah, so hopefully, I don't know if that helps. Will, I know it's a lot, perhaps more than you bargained for in that question. All
Oh,
right.
that's good. I
Yeah.
guess I've just gotten so used to, like I'm doing one thing, my wife's doing the thing that's is kind of the traditional way. I never even thought about that when I was thinking it's the only time I've been involved in rap has been the Federation of Jewish Men's Club and doing the worldwide rap. And
Mhm.
like I say, I was the one handling the camera. So I mean I was just observing but it seemed like, well, that's something unusual.
Yeah.
Not every week. It's not every Friday night. So I didn't know there's something equivalent that it'd be balanced. It's by tradition, it was a balancing thing.
Mhm. Right. Right. No, no, fair enough. Fair enough. And yeah, it will probably be a little while before we really have a handle on what, what that the frequency of that tradition of women wearing tefillin. It will be probably a little bit before we know where that will all land. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Good questions. Okay. So so looking back here at the Shulchan Aruch in terms of um, potential distractions, right? Here are other things that you should not hold in your hand when you're praying. Not a full plate, not so meaning in other words, like if you're doing a one of the like the morning service or the typical daily services that you're not handling food. You're not dealing with matters of food, right? And not a knife. And I presume with knife, we're not talking about like a knife that you like a knife and a fork and a spoon, like you would eat with. I assume we're talking about a more of like a utility knife, one that is used for many different functions. Um, you're not supposed to be holding money or a loaf of bread. All right. And so that's the list. Because in all these cases, one's heart is focused on them that they should not fall, and one will be distracted and lose one's focus. Right? In other words, if you're worried that if you're holding something that you're worried is going to be dropping on the floor, don't hang on, don't be holding on to it while you're praying. Um, you know, it's very interesting. And this is another sort of modern, I don't know if it's just a modern question or just I think just something in general. Um, if you try to think of things that we don't want to, that we worry about dropping, that you can say, well, you shouldn't be holding that because you're worried about it dropping, wouldn't that apply to a baby or a small child? And being, the father of three children, there were numerous times where I was in a position where, um, I would be holding my child while I was leading the congregation in prayer or just doing my own praying. That's part of that is because, um, of modern realities. Um, and also, look, there are times where it's, I mean, this is the dance we do whenever we have young children, is that, young children are, they uh, I mean, we're talking about, babies and toddlers and, maybe preschool kids, they invade perhaps all of our activities of the day, right? I mean, I can tell you that numerous parents talk about, I can't wait till my kid is a little bit older so that I can go to the bathroom by myself. I don't know how often this has happened with parents, but in my experience, that's true. You're at in a public place with a kid, and it's like you have to go to the bathroom, and you have your kid with you, and it's like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna just you have to bring your kid into the bathroom. There's no other choice, right? Um, and I think that that's very much the case with I mean, if with even with matters of prayer, right? Where you're in the midst of praying, and your child wants or needs you to hold them. So, and I think it's something to balance about, do we say, oh, no, the prayer has to take precedence? Well, sometimes it doesn't, because you need to be a parent too. So, um, have I at times held my young child while praying? I absolutely have. Was it distracting? Maybe in some ways, but I would also submit to you that, um, frankly, I think holding a child during prayer kind of adds to the holiness of it all, at least in my opinion.
And it's not one of the things mentioned here, is it?
It isn't mentioned, right? Because again, because I think again, we have all these patriarchal assumptions, right? The
Right.
assumption is that the men are busy praying and the women are busy taking care of the children, and
Well,
never the twain shall meet.
well, and also when it comes to kids, we want to teach them and want them to see. And if they're right there with us while we're praying, then that is the epitome of modeling behavior for them.
No question. No question. Absolutely. Um, and so I think our our modern sensibilities when it comes to parenting often, leads us in a more permissive direction, at least when it comes to children. Being in prayer services, being able to be a part of it next to you, etc. And I think that's a good thing. Um, Not everyone agrees, but I think most people do. Um, so now we have an interesting question here, which is regarding a lulav at its time. And we just recently, like we are not too far removed from this. The lulav being one of the central items of the Sukkot of services during the holiday of Sukkot, which we just had very recently. Um, so there are times in a prayer service when it is customary, or even or really required, to be holding the lulav, to be holding these plants, to be holding the palm and the myrtle and the willow and the and also the citron, the etrog. There are times when you're supposed to have it in your hands while you're praying. So regarding a lulav at its time, meaning during Sukkot, it is permitted to hold it in one's hand. All right, so you have an exception. And since the holding of it in one's hand is a mitzvah, one will not be distracted because of it. Maybe that's wishful thinking. But yeah, that's, in other words, a lulav is an exception because it's a mitzvah to hold it. Now, returning to what I was saying before, I think you could argue that, alongside of Kara's point, um, teaching your children is a mitzvah. So holding a child or being with a child during prayer, I would say that is a very worthy exception. So that would be my own commentary on that. Any other thoughts or questions on this part? Okay. So, all right, but then you're going to ask, then the question's going to come up, or maybe it has already come up in your mind. Well, what about holding a prayer book, right? Shouldn't you be, don't you need to be holding a prayer book? And it says, yeah, it is permitted to hold a prayer book in one's hand at the time one is praying. And since one is holding it for the purpose of the prayer itself, one is not distracted by it. Now that makes sense, right? That if you're holding a prayer book, if you're praying, then yeah, it makes sense. Like, because the prayer book, in other words, it is helping you to concentrate. It is not a barrier to your concentration. On the contrary, it's helping you concentrate. Now, it is similar to what we were saying before, to holding a lulav, that since it's taking lulav, in other words, holding it in our hands and taking ownership of it, even for a moment, is the mitzvah, one is not distracted. But now we have a gloss. Now we have a something else to think about, which is, nevertheless, if the prayer book was not in one's hand before one started praying, one should not go looking for it during the middle of the prayer, meaning the Amidah, like the central prayer, to pick it up, unless it is the case that it was in a particular place which one prepared. Then it is permitted to pick it up even in the middle of the prayer in order to pray from it. In other words, yeah, if you need to hold the prayer book during your prayer, makes sense, right? That you would have it in your hands, but don't sort of start without it and then be like, oh, shoot, I need a prayer book for this part or something like that. Because then you're going to get distracted. Then you're not going to be concentrating on the words of the prayers. The only exception that they offer is if it's already been set in a particular place where it's ready to go for you to pick it up. So in other words, like there's a matter of, obviously avoiding, distractions and things like that. And before we go on, I do want to uh, ask a particular question having to do, and maybe I'll stop sharing for a moment, which is, kind of like a question about modern phenomenon, which is as follows. We have, obviously, Sidurim, prayer books that are printed. There is in the wonders of our modern technology, obviously smart devices, some of which have on them the entirety of a prayer book, right? In fact, I'll give you an example. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. I'm going to share my screen again, and I want to show you this. Okay, so this is Everybody can see this? This is a prayer book. This is a prayer book from the conservative movement. And by the way, there are plenty of Orthodox Siddurim that are like this as well. This is from the conservative movement that's based in Israel. And it has on it the entire prayer book. Now, it's from Israel. There's no English. But this has on it the entirety of the prayer book. A lot of different things as well. This actually has commentary as well. And you can also say, all right, this is like, for instance, this gives you the, like right now it's displaying the evening service, but you can go and say, all right, well, I want to do, let's see, I want to do the morning, the weekday morning service. Here's, this is a place where it has it. So anyway, so you have on your smart device, I mean, this is an iPad that I'm conducting this class on today. You have this very, you have pretty much everything you need in terms of a prayer book. That is, if you're okay with it just being in Hebrew. It's a remarkable thing. It's a really incredible thing that we have all of this right here. Now, the question becomes, okay, if you need to pray, is it okay to use an item like this? Is it all right? Because you could say to yourself, all right, well, look, it's a full siddur. Why not, right? But then you could also ask the question, wait a second. On your smartphone or tablet, there are literally hundreds of other things, way more actually, that could potentially distract you. Right? Because you're pulling up your you're pulling up your siddur from your phone, but then it's like, oh shoot, somebody just sent me a text message. Oh shoot, I need to look at that email. Any number of things, right? You have
What is do not disturb settings?
right. So that's one way to handle it, right? Is to do the do not disturb settings. Exactly. And which I honestly have not mastered, but yeah, there's a way to do that. You could also, for the amount of time like that you have it, if that you're using it, you could say, all right, I'm going to shut off the Wi-Fi. Like once you have that siddur downloaded, you could shut off the Wi-Fi so that nothing new is coming in. And you're not getting interrupted by these, little bleeps and bloops and, calendar reminder and, social media posts and all that sort of thing. That's another way to handle it. But, in a sense, this is one of those cases where I feel like, we live in the best of times and the worst of times.
And Rabbi, during the week, it's not a problem to use the electronic equipment, but on Shabbat and holidays, it used to be an issue,
Right.
and it's something that had to be worked through by the conservative movement. And I believe to this day, Orthodoxy doesn't use electronic devices on Shabbat.
Right.
I'm not sure of that, but I'm pretty sure.
So we've been talking about electricity on Shabbat in the conservative movement in our most recent Judaism 101 class. We actually devoted pretty much the entire class, most recent class, to those questions. And we had a good discussion about it, I think. And we, and right, I mean, it's a challenge because I I imagine a world, and I don't know whether this would ever happen in a conservative synagogue, but I imagine a world in which you can customize things to the point where you walk into synagogue on a Saturday morning. I know this might sound kind of like heresy, but you walk into synagogue on a Saturday morning and you pull out your phone or your tablets and you click on a QR code, and here's today's prayer book, and here's today's and here's the Torah reading of the day. Here's everything you need. It's right here. And basically, people are just going to be using their smart devices. Now, that is potentially a very dangerous thing to have that, because who knows. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, you can hope that those who are using it are keeping to the exact, the prayers and the verses from the Tanakh that we're supposed to be focused on. However, I mean, what's stopping somebody from sitting in synagogue and looking at their screen and saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm praying," and they're watching YouTube instead.
Yeah, but the positive thing about it is when I was in the army, the chaplain gave me a little pocket-sized prayer book that I still have.
Sure.
It was a lot, lot it wasn't practical to carry around or go out in the field for a regular prayer book. Well, I can see this. I can see myself being a 20-year-old soldier in the IDF and having that on my smartphone. Because I think if I was 20 years old in the IDF, I probably wouldn't go anywhere without my smartphone anyway. Well, I could have the prayer book right there with me on that smartphone I'm going to carry anyway.
It's absolutely true. I mean, in terms of like, I mean, look, that's the double-edged sword of it, the incredible the convenience of it makes a lot of things not only easier but even more optimal. Um, that's one side of it, right? And yeah, absolutely. By the way, I mean, I've had a chance to see a couple of different versions of the pocket prayer book given to American soldiers, and they're pretty incredible. I mean, it was once described to me that it's the only prayer book that in which there was a consensus between Orthodox, conservative, and Reform rabbis in terms of what people needed, because they needed to come up with something that was, that any Jew could use. And it's like, okay, we're not going to come up with different prayer books for different Jewish soldiers. We have to kind of band together here. And they came up with something that was at least good enough for different streams of Judaism. It's a pretty incredible little book that it has, and in fact, it even has, I think, prayers for some prayers for the high holidays, because look, face it, when you're a soldier, you never know when you're going to be needed, and if things are urgent and it's Yom Kippur, you're still needed, and if you're needed, you're needed. It doesn't matter what day it is. So they have prayers for every possible occasion. It's a pretty remarkable volume. So I think that is pretty fascinating. Anyway, so okay. Other quick questions or thoughts before we maybe go into the next, at least start the next little topic. Okay, this
No,
one. Oh,
sorry,
please.
I couldn't unmute myself.
You're fine.
I just was going to say, and it's not just for the military, but I have a little tiny little travel prayer book, a siddur, that I take with me when I travel. So, so I can just barely read it, but I know most of the prayers well enough that it's okay. And but I can have it with me, and it's not a burden to carry it.
Right. Right. And one of the most, and by the way, so Gilia, does that travel book, is that the smaller version of the Sim Shalom, or
No, it's an old one. that I actually inherited. And so I don't even know. I have no clue what denomination it's from. So I'll look. I'll let you know.
One thing that's really fun is and like I had this little fascination at one time when I was visiting Israel, going to little, Judaica shops, which they have, in many different places. And I had this little not this mission, but this little challenge to myself to find like the smallest possible siddur. And and just to find like the most compact one. And so they come, I mean, like there's some that come maybe like, yay and yay. I mean, like you can really
Yeah,
get.
I have one like that. I'll bring it to next time you're in town. I'll bring it to class and I'll show it to you. I
Sure.
have a tiny little one, but that one is really hard to read. But I'll bring it and show it to you.
Yeah, well, and the one that I found most fascinating, or the one that I got the biggest kick out of, I think I might have bought it, bought one, and I had it for a time, was a little volume of Tehillim, of the Psalms, right? So there are those who, may have a custom of, even if they don't carry around a prayer book all the time, they're carrying around a copy of the Book of Psalms for any number of occasions where they wish to recite them. And Psalms, the Book of Psalms is, I mean, it's a big book of the Bible, but in terms of a prayer book, it's much shorter. So there was some copy of it that, in terms of its height and width, was no bigger than a postage stamp.
Mhm.
And it was just this little, like, little tiny little like accordion of a book or what have you. Like, and it was just so cute. And I just like, I had to, like, I wanted to have it just for the novelty of it. It wasn't practical, in many ways, unless you had, 2015 vision or something like that. But it is kind of fun, what we can do with it to make Judaism as accessible as possible.
And Psalms make sense because we're supposed to read about 100 Psalms a day, and so if people who are out of the house and not able to go to Minyan, a lot, it's an opportunity to do it like when they have a chance to sit down for 15 minutes, to read a couple of the Psalms.
Sure, sure. And I know this is a little far afield, but I think it's worth mentioning when we talk about Psalms in general, which is that, um, one of the great, and I know I'm kind of advertising for my Psalms class as well, but one of the neat things about it is that, um, uh, there are many occasions where, depending on what we encounter, to be able to recite Psalms is the best way to approach a situation or to manage a particular um, encounter. So, as an example, um, I was at a funeral. This was a little more than 20 years ago. I was at a funeral of it was a sudden death. It was a shocking death. It was the child of an area rabbi, who passed away. So it was just a very, shocking thing. And, the sanctuary was, filled, with, congregants and community members, well, all these different things. And um, so, and I had not been in the synagogue before. And so I go in and I'm a fish out of water. I don't know what to do. I mean, I don't know where to go. I don't know what's proper for me. I was still in a rabbinical school. Like I was, like, I don't know what to do. So I saw a couple people who actually knew this rabbi who they're professors at, my rabbinical school. So they recognized me and they saw me kind of sitting there, kind of just looking kind of stunned and kind of unsure with what to do with myself. And they said, one thing you can do is you can say Tehillim, you can recite Psalms. I said, Okay, which ones? And they said, anyone will do. And just pick it up and do that. So I imagine now a prayer book, a typical prayer book, has in it a decent number of psalms. So I just sort of turned to whatever pages I could find. But there are some who read through them in order. I will also acknowledge that if anyone's heard of the practice of shomrim, of supervising a dead body prior to its burial. In an ideal world, after a death, a body of a Jewish person will not be left completely alone between the death and the burial. So oftentimes that means that community members will sometimes will sit in the same room as the body from at all hours of the day and of the night. So there were a couple of times where I helped with that, where I would go, it would be like 11 p.m., midnight. I'm a night owl, so for me, that didn't really bother me. So I would go at these sort of odd hours, and so it's like, all right, what do you do at that time? Other than making sure that nobody comes in to tamper with the body. And the idea is that every 15 minutes or so, you stand up and you say at least a couple of psalms. So there are many reasons why having something on hand can be helpful. And frankly, what I wound up doing was I had my phone with me and I used it for that. I looked up psalms and I used that. Um, uh, so when we meet next week, we'll talk more about the question of distraction and prayer and things like that, and other ways that we try to avoid it. But hopefully, this was a good kind of introduction to that thought. Any final thoughts? All right.
תודה רבה.
Bavakasha. And again, we'll meet next week and we'll go back to our 11:30 to 12:30 time.
Okay.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
all.
having-
All
Have a good
right.
day.
Thanks so much. Take care.